The gavel slammed against the wood, its echo slicing through the cold courtroom like a blade. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge declared in a flat, unshaken tone, "this court finds you mentally unfit to administer your estate and unfit to maintain custody of your grandchildren." For a moment, I could not breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, as if they had the power to strip away not just my rights, but my very identity. My son, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, sat across the aisle. His suit was perfectly pressed, his jaw tight with satisfaction. He didn't look at me, not once. At his side, Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, wore a thin, triumphant smile, the kind that spoke louder than words. "We've won." My knees trembled under the wooden table. I reached for my lawyer, but his hands stayed folded, his eyes lowered, defeated. My heart ached, not just from the humiliation, but from the cruel truth staring me in the face. My own son had painted me as a woman losing her mind, a danger, a liability. And the court believed him. I turned toward the gallery. Two little faces stared back at me with wide, confused eyes. Ethan and Zoe, my grandchildren, my treasures, my reason to keep going. Their innocence cut me deeper than the judge's sentence. They didn't understand why their grandmother was crying in a room full of strangers. They only knew that, starting today, they would be taken from me. "Grandma loves you," I whispered, though my voice cracked under the weight of it. Before I could take another look, Brandon, my son, stood and pulled them close, like a shepherd protecting his flock from a wolf. Except in this story, I was the wolf. "You'll never see the kids again," he hissed low enough for only me to hear. "You crazy old fool." The words knocked the breath from my lungs. This wasn't my son. This wasn't the boy I had nursed through fevers, the young man I had cheered for at graduation, the man I had supported through law school when I sold my own jewelry to pay his tuition. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. The bailiff instructed me to stand. My world blurred. People's whispers filled the courtroom, their pity like poison. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, that I wasn't senile, that I wasn't dangerous, that I was being betrayed in the cruelest way possible. But the words stuck in my throat. When the session ended, Tiffany leaned over and kissed my son's cheek, as though they had just won the lottery. And in a way, they had. With the bang of that gavel, they now owned my house, my fortune, and worst of all, my grandchildren. As I stumbled out of the courtroom, my heart shattered piece by piece. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel of shadows. People passed by with sidelong glances, some smug, some sympathetic, most indifferent. To them, I was nothing more than another sad case of an old woman losing her mind. But deep inside, beneath the ache and humiliation, something stirred. A quiet voice, a flicker of resistance. They thought it was over. They thought I was broken. But they were wrong, because in the days that followed, when I retreated to the old countryside house my late husband had left behind, I stumbled upon something he had hidden from everyone, even me. A secret locked away behind rust and dust. A secret that would change everything. I thought I had lost everything, until I found what my husband had hidden all along. I remember the light first, the way it buzzed from the ceiling, cold and white, flattening every face into something hard and unforgiving. The courtroom smelled like paper and old wood and someone's too strong cologne. I sat beside my lawyer, a young man with a tidy tie and nervous hands, while the world I built brick by brick lined up to tear me down. Case number 22 to 147. The clerk announced, "Brandon Hayes versus Eleanor Hayes." My son's name sounded like a verdict all by itself. Brandon stood to speak. His black suit fit him well. I knew every seam because I'd saved for it, a birthday gift from the year before. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, at the bench, at the judge, at Victory. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth, confident, practiced. "This is not easy for me." He paused, letting the room feel his pain. "But my mother is no longer well. Tiffany sat a step behind him with her ankles crossed and her hands folded like a schoolgirl at morning assembly, her lips pressed into a sympathetic smile. She tilted her head just so, a portrait of concern. Only I could see the shine in her eyes, the shine of someone who'd already counted the money. My mother, Brandon continued, forgets names and dates. She repeats herself. She puts the children at risk without meaning to. He turned to me, and for one dizzy second, I thought he was going to smile. Instead, he held up a stack of papers. We have medical evaluations, witness statements, and photographic evidence. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Brandon, I whispered, but it came out dry and small. My lawyer tugged at my sleeve, a reminder. Do not speak. They called the first witness, a neighbor I'd chatted with over garden fences for 10 years. Mrs. Patel, Brandon said gently, did you notice changes in my mother's behavior? Mrs. Patel glanced at me, ashamed, then at Tiffany, encouraged. She spoke to herself in the yard, she said. Sometimes she forgot to bring in the mail for days. I once smelled gas from her kitchen. Gas? That never happened. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. In my head, I made a list. I checked the knobs twice. I keep the calendar by the phone. I know my name, the names of my roses, the birthdays of my grandchildren. I am not a danger. My lawyer stood to cross-examine, but he danced around her answers like a child avoiding puddles. So, you're not a doctor, correct? He asked, voice wobbling. She wasn't. The judge nodded, bored. A drop of hope, gone. Then came the doctor, a man with a silver mustache and tired eyes. I had never seen him in my life. Dr. Thorne, Tiffany said from counsel table, as if it tasted sweet. You evaluated Mrs. Hayes. He adjusted his glasses. Based on standardized tests and observational criteria, she shows signs consistent with early-stage dementia, temporal disorientation, short-term memory lapses, compromised executive function. I never met you, I blurted, standing before I knew I was moving. I never took any tests, ma'am, the judge warned. My lawyer tugged me back into my chair. The doctor's words stacked up like bricks around me. Temporal disorientation. Compromised function. All I could see was the day last spring when I had felt oddly sleepy after dinner at Brandon's house. The way a simple sentence slid from my tongue like a wet dish. I had thought it was age or grief or the second cup of coffee Tiffany insisted would help digestion. Then they passed around photographs. My kitchen, filmed in harsh light, looked like a place I would never live. Pots stacked with crusted food, newspapers piled on chairs, the burner left glowing. My bedroom looked ransacked, clothes thrown over the bed, pills scattered like confetti on the nightstand. This is not my house, I said, voice breaking. Someone staged this. Brandon didn't flinch. Mom, you need help, he said, softer than before, weaponizing kindness. You once gave the twins ice cream for breakfast. Once, I said. Because it was their birthday. He sighed, as if I'd proved his point. They played videos next, little clips taken on phones. In one, I reached for my purse and patted the same spot twice, then a third time, puzzled. In another, I repeated a question about pickup time. Was it 3 or 3:30? I asked, gently laughing at myself. Confusion. Tiffany whispered to her attorney, just loud enough, but I remembered that day clearly. After dinner, I'd felt a strange fog. The coffee had been too sweet. My hands had trembled. The twins had been drawing planets at the table while Tiffany filmed me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Your Honor, my lawyer tried, at last finding a thread of backbone. There are benign explanations for age-related lapses. We request an independent evaluation. Brandon lifted a folder. We already have 3, from different clinics, he said. We are not here to punish my mother. We want her in a safe, high-quality facility. We'll handle her finances responsibly. We'll keep the children away from risk. Risk. The word sat in my chest like a stone. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, Do you wish to speak? His voice was not unkind, but it was tired. Tired of people like me crying and people like Brandon sounding reasonable. I stood, smoothing my skirt, and reminded myself to breathe. Your Honor, I began. I am not perfect. I forget where I left my keys and sometimes the name of a neighbor's dog, but I am not a danger. I raised that man. I pointed carefully. With long nights and 2 jobs and a faith that he would grow into a good man, I have cared for Ethan and Zoe since they were born. They know my lullabies. They know the smell of my kitchen. They know that Grandma's house is where the butterflies live because their grandfather, God rest him, planted milkweed by the fence. My throat tightened. I am not crazy. I am grieving. I am older. That is all. Silence. Then the judge's pen scratched across paper, indifferent as rain. Tiffany was called to the stand. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue so new it still had a fold. This is hard for me, she said, voice trembling. I love Eleanor like my own mother. She paused to catch a breath she didn't need. But last month she forgot to pick up the children. They waited. They cried. We had to call the police. She swallowed. I know she would never hurt them on purpose, but intention doesn't change danger. That's not true, I said, rising again. I was parked outside the wrong gate, and you know it. The school changed the pickup line that week. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Hayes. I sank. Around me, whispers rustled like dry leaves. Brandon delivered his closing like a eulogy. He spoke of love and duty and hard choices. He painted himself as the sad son forced by circumstance to protect what his mother could no longer protect. Every sentence was a brick in a wall I could not climb. My lawyers stumbled over statutes and standards. He asked for time. He asked for mercy. He asked for a miracle that was not in the judge's power to give. When the judge left to deliberate, the room exhaled. I stared at the table's scratched edge and traced the grooves with my fingertip. Tiny scars, like the ones on my hands from years of cooking and pruning roses. I thought of Eli, my husband, and how he would have squeezed my shoulder and said, "Steady now, Ellie. Breathe. We'll fight the right fight." But Eli was gone. And I was alone. The judge returned in under 20 minutes. 20 minutes to erase a life. Having reviewed the evidence, he said, "This court finds Mrs. Hayes incompetent to administer her estate and to serve as guardian to minors. Legal guardianship of assets and the permanent custody of the children are granted to Mr. Brandon Hayes." He paused, his eyes rounding with a kind of formal pity. "This decision is effective immediately." The gavel fell. The sound cracked something inside me. Ethan and Zoe stood from the gallery, unsure. I turned toward them, hand outstretched. "My darlings," I whispered. "Come here." Brandon stepped between us. He crouched to their height and spoke in a voice only they could hear. Their faces changed, confusion folding into compliance. Ethan looked back at me, torn in two. Zoe pressed her lips together the way she did when she tried not to cry. "Please," I begged, not dignified now, not proud, just a grandmother in pieces. "Let me hug them." Tiffany slid her hand through Brandon's arm like silk. "It's better if we make a clean transition," she said, as if we were talking about furniture and not human hearts. "For the children, for the children," Brandon repeated. And it was then I realized how far away he had drifted, carried by a current I could not see. The bailiff touched my elbow. "Ma'am," he said softly. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. My legs felt hollow. The benches, the flags, the seal on the wall, all of it blurred into one long, cold smear. Reporters hovered near the doors like sparrows scenting bread. I heard my name in their mouths and did not recognize it. As we filed out, Ethan wriggled free for a second, the way only boys can, and ran 2 steps toward me. "Grandma," Brandon caught him. "No," he said, not shouting, "just steel. We've talked about this, buddy." I pressed my palm to my chest to keep my heart from falling out. "I love you," I called, the words cracking. I love you to the moon and back. Zoe lifted her little hand and waved once, small as a breath. Then they were shepherded out, my future walking away on short legs. People stared. Some nodded as if to say how sad. Others looked almost satisfied, like gossip that proved itself true. The young lawyer muttered something about appeals and evaluations and next steps, his voice a distant radio in a storm. I gathered my purse, my papers, my scraps of self, on the table. A single bobby pin gleamed in the harsh light. It wasn't mine. I left it there anyway. A tiny, accidental memorial to a day that would not stop happening, even after it ended. In the corridor, Brandon finally met my eyes. For a heartbeat, I saw the boy who had once handed me a dandelion and called it a rose. Then Tiffany tugged his sleeve, and the boy vanished. "You'll be taken care of," he said, as if kindness could be ordered from a catalog. "It's for the best, for the best," I repeated, because words had lost their meanings. Best for whom? They walked away, and the sound of their footsteps beat a rhythm I would hear in my sleep for weeks. The elevator swallowed them whole. The doors slid shut. I stood alone with the buzzing lights and the hollow of my name. Outside, the city was bright and loud and alive. I felt thin in it, a shadow that sunlight could not warm. I reached into my purse for my keys, touched them, counted them, like a ritual. House key, car key. The small brass one I kept, though I could not remember what it opened. I used to joke that Eli made that one to keep some silly surprise a secret. I did not know yet that the only thing standing between me and oblivion was a secret he had hidden where love hides its last defenses. Close enough to find when you are desperate, hidden enough to save you when no one else will. But in that moment, I only knew the weight of loss, the paper cut of shame, the burning wish to be held by the man who used to say, "Ellie, the storm always passes." I walked into the daylight, each step a small act of defiance against the verdict stamped on my life. Somewhere behind me, in a room that smelled like paper and old wood, a gavel still echoed. Somewhere ahead, in a kitchen I had not yet cleaned, behind a stove I had not yet moved, a door waited to be opened, and the key to it had been in my hands all along. The courthouse doors swung shut behind me, heavy and final, as though they had swallowed me whole and spit out only a shadow. I drifted down the steps like a ghost, the city air thick and unkind. Car horns blared. People hurried past with phones pressed to their ears. Lives moving forward. Mine had just ended, but no one stopped to notice. A group of neighbors from my block stood on the sidewalk. Mrs. Jensen clutched her handbag a little tighter when she saw me. Mr. Clark whispered something to his wife, his lips curling into a half smile. I knew that look. It was the look of people who'd been waiting for gossip to become truth. The old woman's lost it. Poor thing. Always seemed a little off. Their eyes cut deeper than the judge's gavel. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them I was still me, still Eleanor, still the woman who baked pies for their church fundraisers and tended roses that climbed taller than fences. But my voice had dried into silence. So I lowered my head and walked on. When I turned the corner onto my street, my breath caught. My house, the one Eli and I built, board by board, over 40 years, was swarming with people. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Its ramp stretched into the foyer like a tongue. Men in overalls carried out boxes I had packed with trembling hands. Tiffany was already directing them, her pink blouse crisp, her nails polished. Careful with that, she snapped as a mover tilted a box of framed photographs. Those are valuable antiques. They weren't antiques. They were my life. Wedding photos, my son's graduation picture, Ethan's first crayon drawing. I reached out instinctively, but Brandon stepped between us, his face unreadable. "Mom," he said, voice clipped. "We agreed to make this as painless as possible." Painless. The word almost made me laugh. Did he think my heart was numb? Did he think that watching strangers paw through my memories could ever be painless? Inside, the house was already changing. Tiffany had pinned swatches of fabric against the living room wall, pale creams and sterile grays. "We'll knock down that wall," she told a decorator. "Open concept, more light. Knock down the wall." That was the wall where Eli and I marked Brandon's height year after year. Pencil notches climbing like a ladder of love. 4 years old, 3 feet tall. 10 years old, 4 feet 6. That wall wasn't just plaster. It was proof of a childhood, proof of my motherhood, and she wanted to erase it like a bad draft. I slipped past them into the dining room. The old oak table still bore faint scratches from decades of meals and homework and birthday candles. I ran my fingers over the grooves. "Remember when Brandon spilled grape juice and swore it was magic ink?" I whispered to Eli, though he wasn't there to answer. Upstairs, boxes of clothes lined the hallway. A mover asked Tiffany what to do with them. "Donate them," she said. "They smell old, old." Those clothes held Ellie's cologne, the press suit he wore on our anniversary dinners, the sweater he threw over my shoulders on chilly nights. They weren't just fabric. They were fragments of him. I pulled open the door to our bedroom, but it was no longer ours. Tiffany had draped fabric samples across the bedspread, talking about modern touches. My jewelry box sat open on the dresser, empty. Brandon had frozen my accounts, so even my small treasures were gone. "Please," I whispered to no one. "At least let me keep some photos." Tiffany glanced at me, her smile practiced. "We'll send you copies." Copies? As though a copy could hold the weight of a photo's creased edges, the smudge of a child's fingerprint, the faint smell of cedar from the old frames. I walked through the house one last time, my hand brushing the walls, the banister, the kitchen counter where Eli used to set down flowers he brought from the market. Each touch was a goodbye. In the basement, I found the first chairs Eli and I had bought as newlyweds, wobbly, patched, painted yellow one lazy Sunday. "Leave them," I told the movers, voice breaking. "I don't have room for memories anymore." When I turned back, Brandon was standing there, cold as stone. "Take everything," he ordered. "This house needs a deep clean, deep clean." As if 40 years of family were dirt, I left without ceremony, clutching a single box of what they allowed me. One photo of Eli, my wedding ring, a worn cookbook with my handwriting in the margins. Everything else, my son, my grandchildren, my home, was gone. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel near the airport. The wallpaper peeled, the bedspread smelled faintly of bleach. I sat on the hard mattress, staring at the box on the floor, and cried until my chest ached. They hadn't just taken my fortune. They had taken my story, stripped me of proof that I had lived a life worth anything at all. But as dawn cracked through the thin curtains, I remembered something. A place. Years ago, Eli bought a small retreat in the countryside, 12 acres tucked into the mountains, with a weathered cabin and a creek that sang in spring. "Someday," he'd said, eyes sparkling, "we'll retire there, away from noise, away from greed." We never had time. The property sat forgotten, half wild, a secret only we shared. Maybe Brandon didn't know it existed. Maybe Tiffany hadn't found the deed. I called a cab, the driver eyeing me curiously as I loaded the single box into his trunk. "Moving to the country, ma'am?" he asked. Something like that, I thought. Though I didn't say it aloud, my voice felt too fragile to use. The ride stretched long, city giving way to highways, highways to narrow roads lined with pine. At last, the cabin appeared, a sagging roof, windows clouded with dust, grass up to my knees. It looked abandoned, forgotten, like me. The driver frowned. "You sure this is the place?" "Yes," I said, handing him the last of my cash. "I'll be fine." But as his car disappeared down the dirt road, I stood in silence, the weight of loss pressing against me. The cabin loomed ahead, weary but waiting. I gripped the key Eli had hidden under the flower pot years ago and whispered into the still mountain air, "You were right, Eli. When everything else is gone, this is all that's left." And with that, I stepped inside. The front door groaned as I pushed it open, hinges stiff from years of disuse. A wave of stale air rolled out, thick with dust and dampness, wrapping around me like a shroud. I stepped inside cautiously, my shoes crunching against grit on the floorboards. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. But time has a way of shrinking places once seen through the eyes of love. Faded curtains sagged in the windows, their edges frayed like the pages of an old book. White sheets draped over furniture gave the illusion of ghosts waiting patiently for my return. The silence pressed heavy, so absolute I could hear my heartbeat echo in my ears. This was to be our refuge, Ellie's dream. He bought the land when Brandon was still in college. One day, Ellie, he'd said, grinning as he held the deed, this will be our getaway, just the two of us. No phones, no business deals, no city noise, a place where we can breathe. I'd smiled then, too busy with life to think about retiring. Now, here I was, banished not by choice, but by betrayal. I set my single box on the floor and looked around. Dust clung to every surface. Cobwebs stretched like lace across the corners. A crack split the stone fireplace, and water stains marked the ceiling above it. The kitchen was worse. Brown water dripped lazily from the faucet, and mouse droppings littered the counter. It was unfit for living, but at least it was mine. The first night, I lay on a bare mattress in the main bedroom, clutching the wedding photo of Eli and me. The wind rattled loose shingles, and every creak of the cabin felt like footsteps. I pulled the blanket tighter, whispering into the dark, "What would you do, Eli?" But only silence answered, broken by the distant hoot of an owl. Morning came reluctantly, pale light sneaking through grime-streaked windows. My body ached from the hard mattress, but I forced myself up. If I didn't move, if I let despair swallow me, I knew I'd never climb out. So I found an old rag, filled a bucket with cloudy water, and began to clean. I scrubbed until my arms burned. The more I wiped, the more the wood beneath revealed itself, strong, patient, enduring, just like Eli. He had built the shelves in the kitchen himself, hammering late into the night. "These'll last longer than both of us," he joked. My throat tightened at the memory, but I kept scrubbing, letting the rhythm of work anchor me. Cleaning became my lifeline. I swept away cobwebs, chased out mice, and opened every window to let in the mountain air. The smell of pine and earth replaced the mustiness, and for the first time in days, I could breathe deeply. But at night, the silence crept back in. It wasn't like the hum of the city, where loneliness could hide behind traffic and chatter. Here, loneliness was louder. It sat with me at the table, followed me from room to room, curled up beside me in bed. Sometimes I spoke aloud, pretending Eli was listening. "Do you remember that summer we painted the porch?" I asked the empty air. "You dripped more paint on yourself than the wood." I laughed, though the sound broke into sobs. Talking to him hurt, but not talking at all hurt worse. Days blurred into each other. I'd wake, clean, cook simple meals, and sit on the porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The beauty mocked me. The sky blazed gold and purple, yet I felt gray inside, hollowed out by humiliation. The betrayal played on a loop in my head, the neighbor's pitying stares, Tiffany's smirk, Brandon's cold voice calling me a danger. Each memory was a blade that refused to dull. But still, the cabin held me together. Every nail and board carried Ellie's touch. Every corner whispered his presence. One afternoon, while scrubbing the kitchen floor, I paused to rest my aching knees. My eyes wandered to the old stove against the wall. Its enamel was chipped, its surface stained with rust. I remembered Eli insisting on installing it himself. "Solid," he'd said, patting it proudly. "This baby will outlast us all." I noticed then that it sat slightly off-center, not snug against the wall like it should have been. Faint scrape marks trailed along the floorboards beneath it, as if it had been moved before. My brow furrowed. Eli was meticulous. He would never have left it askew. I ran my hand along the side, feeling the cool metal. Something about it tugged at me, like a memory half-formed, but I pushed the thought aside. It was probably nothing, just another reminder that this place, like me, had been neglected too long. I fetched another bucket of water and kept scrubbing, yet the image of those scrape marks lingered in my mind long after I left the kitchen. When I tried to sleep that night, I kept seeing the stove, slightly crooked, hiding something behind it. I rolled onto my side, clutching Ellie's photo, and whispered into the dark, "What did you leave me, Eli?" The wind howled against the cabin walls, but deep inside me, a flicker of curiosity began to stir. By the fourth morning, the kitchen looked almost respectable. The counters were scrubbed to a dull sheen, and the windows, freed from their blanket of grime, admitted a thin ribbon of mountain light that fell across the floor like a blessing. I worked in quiet, the faucet's steady drip keeping time, the bristles of my brush whispering over wood and tile. Work was safer than thought. I had saved the stove for last. It glowered at me from its crooked station against the brick wall, enamel chipped like an old soldier's teeth. Eli had loved that stubborn thing. "They don't make them like this anymore, Ellie," he'd said, patting its side, but its being off-center gnawed at me. Eli was precise. He aligned everything, picture frames, business ledgers, his socks in the drawer. He wouldn't have left the stove askew. I crouched, tracing the faint crescent of a scuff along the floorboard where its foot should have been. The groove continued, a pale arc, as if the stove had been dragged, then nudged back and not quite home. My fingertips came away gray with dust and something that looked like graphite. "All right, you brute," I murmured, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's see what you're hiding." The stove was heavier than grief. I rocked it, and it didn't budge. I fetched a wooden broom and a dull metal spatula from a drawer, slid the broom handle under the back edge, and levered carefully, praying I wouldn't splinter the handle or my back. The stove creaked like an old man standing from a chair. I leaned my shoulder into it, pushing inch by inch. Each grunt echoed in the small room. Sweat dampened my collar. The legs scraped with a low, stubborn cry. Another inch, and another. When the gap was wide enough to peer behind, dust billowed, peppering my throat. I coughed, blinked, and saw it. A square of dark metal set into the brick, flush as a secret, a faint seam tracing its edges. Not a loose board, not a forgotten vent. A safe, or a heartbeat the world pinwheeled. Ellie's precise stove, the scrape marks, the nagging off-center placement, snapping into pattern-like constellations. My hand went to my chest, finding my heartbeat where my necklace used to rest. "Eli," I whispered, the name both prayer and accusation. "What did you do?" The safe was small but deep, matte steel with a digital keypad and a tiny keyhole beneath. The faceplate bore no brand. It could have been installed yesterday or 20 years ago. It didn't belong to the cabin's age. It belonged to Ellie's mind. I wiped the dust with a dishcloth until the numbers shone. The keypad was clean. No telltale smudges on certain digits. No clue to the code. I stared, listening to the drip, drip, drip of the faucet and the far-off murmur of wind in the pines. Fear ticked through me, but so did a bright, crackling thread of hope. He had hidden something. From whom? From me? For me? I thought of all the combinations that meant something to us and felt suddenly dizzy, as if every date we'd shared, a lifetime of birthdays and anniversaries and little rituals, had become a lockpick I might snap. I pressed 061582 June 15, 1982. Our wedding date. A red light blinked. Error. All right, I said, swallowing. We weren't sentimental enough for that. I tried 12235 December 3rd, 1953, Ellie's birthday. Another blink. Another denial. The tiny screen gave nothing back but silence. I tried 081181 for Brandon's birthday, and my thumb hovered an instant over the last number, the cruelty of habit hitting me from the side. I pressed it anyway. Error. A strain of panic tightened across my shoulders. Some safes lock out after failed attempts. I didn't know if I was 3 attempts away from losing whatever lay inside forever. I leaned against the counter, hands braced, and watched the strip of light creep across the floor toward the wall. The day turning its head, The cabin had grown still, expectant, as if it held its breath with me. Stop guessing like a stranger, I told myself. Think like the man you married. Eli loved routine. He left the house at exactly 7, kept ledgers alphabetized, folded his handkerchiefs in quarters. But when it came to symbols, he chose meaning over convenience. He had said once, in the kitchen of our old house, "On the day you were born, the universe finally started counting properly." He'd laughed, embarrassed by his own poetry, and kissed my wrist where the vein beat. My fingers trembled. I entered 03155 March 7th 15, 1957. My birthday. The keypad blinked green. A soft click sounded like the release of a held breath. The safe's door gave under my fingers with the faintest resistance and then opened, the metal cool against my palm. Inside was a dark, narrow cavity smelling of paper and something faintly medicinal, like old tape and plastic. I didn't exhale until my eyes adjusted and shapes resolved. A thick manila envelope, edges darkened with time. A smaller bundle of folded documents tied with plain twine. A compact, black voice recorder with a scratched screen and a little red button. A single USB drive labeled in Ellie's block letters ledger. On top of everything lay a letter. Cream paper. My name in Ellie's unmistakable hand. Confident. A little slanted. The ink a rich brown that had always smudged on his fingers. For a moment I couldn't move. The room telescoped to this small, precise altar to his foresight. My knees gave a warning throb that said sit before you fall. So I slid down the cabinet and onto the floor, the safe yawning in front of me, the stove hulking like a sentry to my left. Dust motes turned in the shaft of light, as if the air itself were reading over my shoulder. I reached for the letter. The envelope was thick and sealed with a strip of clear tape. My name looked suddenly odd on the page, as if it belonged to someone wiser than the woman who had been humiliated in a courtroom. I broke the seal. The first line sat alone, centered, as deliberate as a verdict. If you are reading this, the moment of truth has arrived. A chill chased up my spine. I heard, impossibly, Ellie's voice, low, steady. The voice he used when telling me something I didn't want to hear. I skimmed the next line. Forgive me for waiting. Forgive me for leaving this to paper instead of to my arms. And my breath hitched. I set the letter down because if I didn't, I might devour it all at once and choke on the past. I needed to understand the scope of what he'd left. I lifted the manila envelope. Inside, documents fanned out. Property deeds stamped with counties I barely recognized. Copies of bank statements with balances that made my stomach drop and then climb. Corporate papers for entities I'd never heard of that nonetheless bore Ellie's neat signatures and notary seals. There were photocopies of passports and a stack of grainy photographs, some of Tiffany, hair tucked under a baseball cap, entering a clinic. Some of a medicine cabinet's contents, pill bottles with labels I couldn't pronounce. Some of a car parked outside our house at odd hours, its license plate circled in red pen. Attached to several photos were printed emails. Subject lines like consultation and follow UP. Entire paragraphs blacked out except for the most damning nouns. At the bottom of the stack lay a document labeled affidavit with a familiar name typed above a trembling signature. A doctor I'd seen on the stand, now swearing under penalty of perjury that he had never examined me in person, that his evaluation had been compiled from secondhand symptom reports and promised payment through an intermediary. The notarization bore a date from months before the trial even began. My mouth went dry. The room had not changed, but something in the world had tilted, aligning like a hidden hinge. I set the envelope down with care and picked up the small recorder. The plastic was warm from the nest it had made inside the safe. I turned it over. Eli had scrawled A in silver marker on the back and underlined it twice. I thumbed the button. The screen lit up. A list of files labeled with dates, most clustered around months. I remembered visiting Brandon and Tiffany for dinner. My thumb hovered over the earliest label, but I stopped, awareness prickling. Once I started listening, nothing could go back to what it had been 5 minutes ago. There is a before and after to certain truths. Crossing them is permanent. I put the recorder gently on the floor beside me and returned to the letter. My hands were steadier now, made firm by anger that was no longer formless. If Eli had hidden a safe and filled it with this, then he had known something. He had known. And he had chosen me as the instrument of the knowing. I read the first paragraph slowly, tasting each word. If you are reading this, the moment of truth has arrived. It means a plan I feared has begun. It means I am not there to stand beside you as I promised I always would. It means I must be the kind of husband who protects you from the grave. I swallowed hard. The page blurred for a second, the letters swimming. I blinked them back into focus. He wrote of patterns he'd noticed. Money moved in ways that didn't add. The way Tiffany's smile never reached her eyes. He apologized for the secrecy. You would have tried to fix this with kindness, Ellie. Kindness is a beautiful hammer, but it cannot fasten a lock. And then the tone changed. The way a river changes when it approaches a falls. He wrote a list. Names, dates, places. A clinic on Peachtree where records could be pulled. A storage unit number. A contact at a bank who owed him loyalty. He wrote of a second ledger. Perhaps the USB drive, containing the truth about our accounts. He wrote of a lawyer, Stone, who would know what to do when the time came. Of letters to agencies sealed and waiting for a signature. I looked up. The room suddenly too quiet. Outside, a gust of wind pressed against the window. Branches rasped the glass lightly as if asking to be let in. My wrist ached from holding the pages too tightly. I flexed my fingers and turned to the next sheet. Tape. There was a small key with a numbered tag. Storage, Unit 47. The twine around the bundle of documents on the safe's lower shelf now looked purposeful, not quaint. I could have kept reading right then, gulping it like air after nearly drowning. But the edges of the moment felt sacred, singular. I was at a threshold, almost but not quite through the door. My life, which had been collapsed to a narrow hallway of shame, was suddenly branching in 5 directions at once, each bright with risk and redress. I gathered the documents back into a careful stack, laid the recorder on top, and rested my palm over the letter as if to bless it. I closed my eyes and said aloud, I'm here, Eli. I found it. The cabin creaked in reply, a settling sound, as though the house itself had been waiting to exhale. I lifted the letter again, its weight a promise, and drew a breath as deep as the first breath of a newborn. The first line glowed up at me, absolute, inevitable. If you are reading this, the moment of truth has arrived. I steadied the page with both hands. Ellie's handwriting was the same as it had always been, firm, measured, a man who squared his corners. But the voice beneath the ink was different, stripped of pleasantries, urgent. The tone he used only when the house was on fire, and there was no time to shout. If you are reading this, the moment of truth has arrived. It means I failed to find a way to tell you in person. It means I'm asking you to trust me in the dark. He did not clear his throat with apologies after that. He began, cleanly, with a ledger of harms. I did not want to see it at first. The letter read like a confession of blindness. I wanted to believe we had simply grown older and careful, that Brandon had chosen a difficult woman and would grow softer with time. But patterns are louder than hope. He set out the first pattern. Money that moved and reappeared with missing commas, invoices from clinics under different names, transfers timed to family dinners. He wrote the way he balanced books, line by line, each entry anchoring the next, until the page could bear its own weight. You will want to hate our son for what he will do, he wrote. Save that hate. You will need it for someone else. Brandon is not the hand that moves. He is the hand that is moved. He described how Tiffany had been the first to recommend a routine screening for me after my 65th birthday, a clinic with a woman at reception who spelled my name wrong on every form. He followed the clinic to its paper shell, an address that held 3 companies. 2 of them dissolved, one of them owned by a cousin of a friend who had once borrowed money from a man named Silas Thorne. The name snagged my breath. The doctor with the mustache. And then the sentence that followed tore what was left of my composure. Thorne owes her. She knows which of his secrets have dates and prescriptions attached. Eli did not dramatize what came next. He simply recorded it. A carpenter marking cuts, the confusion you felt after dinners, the shaky hands you blamed on age, the repeating of small questions. It was not age. I found blister packs in their kitchen, tucked behind flour. I counted tablets. I replaced tablets. I watched them disappear in pairs after you left. I installed a camera, Ellie. In our own house. I installed a camera because I needed proof strong enough to win when I would not be there to stand beside you. I am ashamed of the method, not the purpose. Shame knocked at me, too, not because he had acted, but because he had acted alone. I pressed my thumb to the margin until it left a pale crescent. The page continued. You are not ill. You were made to look ill. Small doses, subtherapeutic, mostly, of medicines meant for tremors, for sleep, for nausea, enough to fog the edges, to slow a thought, enough to film you forgetting a purse, to record you asking a time twice, to turn a dot of ordinary into a line of diagnosis. Tiffany is patient. She harvests slowly. She harvests with sugar in your coffee and almonds in your salad. I tasted bitterness that wasn't there. He had dated everything. The dates lined up with my worst evenings. The night I lost my keys in my own bag. The Sunday I had to lie down after chicken and lettuce. The Thursday Brandon insisted on driving me home, just in case. He had noted the brand names, the lot numbers, even the pharmacist's initials. He had filed it as if one day he would be asked to prove a storm had fallen. Then, the second pattern, witnesses. He had attached a stapled pack behind the page, a list of our neighbors who had provided statements for court. Next to two of the names, he had written small arrows. Owed Tiffany cash. Accepted a loan from Brandon's firm. On Mrs. Patel's name, Eli had scrawled a soft apology. She is not unkind. She is unbrave. I could see her face again, her eyes flitting to Tiffany's before she spoke. He turned the blade without warning. I also need to tell you what I learned about Tiffany before she became a Hayes. He had hired a private investigator after their engagement. I wanted only to know if she had troubles we could help with. We found an appetite, not a trouble. Her history unfolded like a staircase that never led down. A first marriage to a sickly businessman who amended his will 3 months before he went suddenly. A brief union with a young attorney that ended when a paternity test was requested. Moves across counties that lined up with small inheritances and sealed police reports. There were photocopies of marriage licenses, obituaries with soft focus photos, real estate deeds swinging like gates from one name to another. A pattern of proximity to money and the quiet that follows a funeral. She is not clumsy, Eli wrote. She is deliberate. She does not kill with a knife. She kills by persuading hearts to fail. I set the page down. The cabin's quiet had a pulse to it. Outside, a pine branch tapped the window as if indexing time. Then came the section I did not want to read and needed more than oxygen. Brandon and the children. Eli did not break me with a revelation about blood. He did something colder. He dismantled the story I had been given and put a truer one in its place. About the children, he wrote, You love them. You will always love them. That love is not a contract that anyone else can void, but the papers that say they belong to our son are bent. He routed the bending. Adoption documents with dates that did not align with the hospital's discharge. A birth certificate amended by a clerk later indicted for falsifying records. A closed file in a county office that nonetheless had 2 signatures on the wrong line. He did not write, They are not ours. He wrote, They were someone else's first, and someone else was denied. Attached was a letter from a couple in another town, Marcus and Delilah, filed years ago, pleading for information about their daughter's twins after she died in a car accident. The letter had been stamped received, and then stamped file inactive in a different ink, as though justice were a package returned to sender. My eyes stung. I had no space left inside me for the morality of blood and paper. I had only space for their small hands in mine, and the knowledge that truth would not crush that love. It would enlarge it to include the hands that had been empty for too long. Eli did not linger on grief. He turned to defense. The next pages rewired the map of our lives. "The money you think we have is not the money we have," he wrote. And for a strange second I laughed, a dry, startled sound, because I could hear him grinning when he wrote it. Behind the letter lay the proof. Account statements that skipped the bank Brandon believed he controlled. Corporate structures nested like matryoshka dolls whose outer shell bore familiar names, but whose inner cores belonged to entities with addresses in places Tiffany had never heard of. Deeds to properties we had sold on paper, but still held in trusts. Eli had taken the family fortune and moved it 1 inch to the left, just enough that anyone who traced it by habit would find a shell and stop. "The mansion," he wrote, "has a mortgage it can keep. The businesses he runs will break even if he works hard, and will fail if he is lazy. The real assets grow where only you and I can water them." A note in the margin. "Stone knows the valves." The USB marked ledger, then, was no vanity. It was the map. He had left me not a windfall but a system, valves and gates and redundancies. If one well was poisoned, another ran clean. Then he set flint to steel. "You will be told you are unwell. You will be told, by faces that once held cake at your birthdays, that you are confused and dangerous. Ellie, listen to me. You are neither. I have collected what you need to turn this entire room of liars into witnesses." The manila envelope confirmed his promise. There were affidavits already notarized, sealed letters addressed to a federal agent Eli trusted. "The one with the dog that limps," he noted, as if telling me how to pick him out of a crowd. Timelines correlating dispensations of pills to nights I ate at Brandon's table, and lists of serial numbers of medications photographed in Tiffany's vanity. There were screenshots of 2 text threads, one with a contact saved as Silas T., timestamps matching days the clinic had evaluated me, and another with a person named V discussing dosages that don't show. Eli had printed these with a care that felt almost tender. Yellow highlighter around the "don't show." He spoke in the letter directly to my future, like a coach in my ear. "Here is what you do. First, call Stone. He will file a motion to vacate the incompetency judgment based on fraud. Second, sign the letters to the Bureau. They will do what a family court cannot. Third, do not confront Brandon alone. He will hear it from a badge before he can hear it from your mouth. He will need to be held by truth before he can be held by you." I had to stop then and press the heel of my hand to my sternum. The ache there was not fear. It was the weight of being seen. He knew what words would tear me, and which would stitch me back. I lifted the recorder. The files were labeled with dates and 2 letter tags, KT, Dem, PH. The first entry began with the scratch of a chair, then Tiffany's voice, unmistakable, bright and thin like glass held to the light. "The old woman is stubborn," she said, almost laughing. "But the pills do the work. We just need a few good clips." A second voice, lower, slippery, asked, "You sure the doc's in?" "As long as the envelope is, he is," she replied. "He likes his red wine, and his second mortgage is." Persuasive. I jerked the recorder away from my ear as if it had burned me. Air felt different after that, thinner, sharper. I pressed play again. Another file. The sound of cutlery, Brandon talking about a case, Tiffany cooing, "You're saving your mother from herself." She said it like grace before a meal. Later in the same recording, dishes clinked. A mug scraped. There was the soft hiss of powder slipping into coffee. I could hear my own voice, cheerful and blurred around the edges, asking, "What time do I pick up the kids?" Twice in 10 minutes. The next file had laughter, Tiffany's, talking to someone not in the room. "Once he has power of attorney," she said, "we start phase 2. Stress is so bad for the heart, isn't it? And genetics. Well," she tisked as if she pitied us, "it will look inevitable." I pressed stop. A sound rung out of me, something between a sob and a growl. I had never made that sound in my life. The cabin accepted it and stayed standing. There was more, of course. There were photos of pill bottles in a drawer next to silk scarves. There were screenshots of a shopping list with metoprolol, digoxin, and a question mark, as if she were planning a menu. There was a thumb drive with a single folder titled Clinic, inside of which lived appointment logs that did not match dates I had been in my own kitchen icing a cake. There were notes about a storage unit in my husband's neat block letters, Unit 47, and beneath it a combination that was not a date, but a pattern I recognized. The last digits of the phone we'd had since Brandon was 12, and yet, woven through the evidence, Eli kept reaching for me. In the margins he wrote reminders that read like a hand on my back. Drink water after you cry. Call Stone before you call anyone else. Do not go to the big house until the federal men have been. He even found a way to touch the part of me that still wanted to believe my son would open his eyes if I screamed loud enough. I know you, he wrote. You will want to forgive before there is confession. Wait. Let the truth do its work in him. Your forgiveness will be richer when it meets a man who can hold it. Page after page. The letter tightened a lattice around me. Support I hadn't known I needed until I leaned. Near the end, the ink thinned, as if he had written the final paragraphs at night with a pen that had almost given up. There is one more thing, and it is the heaviest. He wrote about the children's other grandparents. The letter I had already seen. The phone number scrawled in pencil on the back of a photograph. They are looking for what you love. You will hate the logistics of it. The way papers are prioritized over lullabies. But I know you. You will find a way to make a larger circle of family instead of a smaller one. It will hurt. It will also heal. He closed not with strategy, but with a benediction. I am asking you to do hard, holy work, not just to win in court, but to set a table in a house that almost forgot how. You are the builder now. I have laid the planks I could. The last line undid me and bound me in the same breath. I have not left you money, Ellie. I have left you leverage. Use it to lift the world back onto its hinges. I let the pages fall into my lap and leaned my head against the cabinet. The light through the window had traveled across the floor and climbed the opposite wall. The room had pivoted around me while I sat unmoving. Dust hung in the air like tiny planets. My hands shook, but my mind did not. It felt like standing on bedrock after weeks of mud. On the floor beside my thigh, the recorder waited, patient, unblinking. The USB drive sat like a seed. The key with the tag winked in the stripe of sun. Each item was a page in a story I had not wanted to be in and now, finally, would finish. I gathered everything back into the safe, not to hide it, but to bless it with order. I placed the letter on top and smoothed it with my palm. The stove, enormous and ridiculous, crouched where I had shoved it, a faithful guard over a secret that had held when everything else collapsed. I closed my eyes and saw Tiffany's hands on a mug, Brandon's signature on a petition. The children's faces turned toward me in a courtroom gone cold. Threads that had looked random now braided tight, running from my kitchen table to a clinic door to a bank account in a name Tiffany didn't know how to pronounce. I did not feel powerless. I felt like a woman who had been handed a map to a mine and a match. When I could trust my voice, I heard it before I realized it was mine, quiet and certain, speaking into the cabin's ribs. Eli, you knew all along. I woke the next morning with Ellie's words still ringing inside me. You are the builder now. For the first time since the courtroom disaster, my body did not feel like a hollow shell. I was tired, yes, but it was the tiredness of someone who had work to do, not someone waiting to die. I laid the letter carefully back in the safe, then set the recorder, the documents, and the key into an old leather satchel I found in the cabin closet. My hands did not tremble this time. They were steady, purposeful. On a notepad, Eli had written the name I had circled 3 times the night before. Reginald Reggie Stone, attorney at law. Eli had trusted him, and if my husband trusted a man, that was all I needed. I dialed the number. A secretary answered, polished and professional. Stone and Associates. How may I direct your call? This is Eleanor Hayes, I said, my voice sharper than it had sounded in months. I was told by Eli Hayes to contact Mr. Stone if something ever happened. There was silence on the other end. Then, almost reverently, she said, "Please hold, Mrs. Hayes." A click, then a deep, steady voice. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Reggie Stone. I've been waiting for your call." The room tilted slightly. "Waiting? Eli came to me 2 years before he passed," Stone explained. "He told me what Tiffany was planning. We prepared everything, affidavits, motions, even a criminal referral package. He said you would call when the time was right." Tears welled. But they weren't of despair this time. They were of pride. Eli had never left me defenseless. "Mr. Stone," I whispered, "the time is now." That same afternoon, I traveled back into the city carrying the satchel like a soldier carries ammunition. Stone's office sat on the 20th floor of a glass tower, far above the streets where I had once walked humiliated from the courthouse. The man himself was silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with a warmth beneath the steel. He rose when I entered. "Mrs. Hayes." He clasped my hands firmly. "You're not alone in this anymore." I placed the satchel on his mahogany desk and began to unpack Ellie's gifts: the envelope of deeds, the affidavits, the USB, the recorder. I told him about the safe, the letter, the photographs, the recordings of Tiffany's voice. Stone's eyes narrowed with every item I revealed. Finally, he leaned back, tapping the desk. "This is overwhelming evidence. Fraud, perjury, medical malpractice, conspiracy, even attempted murder. Tiffany Sanders." He practically spat the name. "Is finished." "But Brandon?" I asked, voice breaking. "He believed every lie. He helped them take everything from me." Stone studied me. "Your son was manipulated. We'll prove that, too. The Bureau will want to know the bigger picture. We'll need to involve the FBI." "The FBI?" "Yes." Eli and I prepared a full criminal referral. With the recordings and documents you now hold, they'll open a federal investigation. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Thin, but real. The next week moved like a storm gathering force. Stone filed an emergency motion to vacate the incompetency judgment, attaching preliminary affidavits and some of Ellie's evidence. The judge set a hearing. At the same time, Stone arranged a meeting with federal agents. I sat in a gray conference room, my hands clenched on the table, as 2 FBI officers in dark suits reviewed the manila folder of documents and pressed play on the recorder. When Tiffany's voice filled the room, calmly discussing how the old woman won't recover once she's in the facility, I watched the agent's jaws tighten. When she mentioned Brandon's inevitable heart attack, one agent slammed his pen down. "This is attempted murder," he said flatly. "We'll move immediately." I left the building not as a victim, but as a witness, carrying justice at my side. That night, Stone arranged another meeting, this one in a modest suburban house. I was nervous as he led me up the driveway. "They've been waiting for years," he said softly. The door opened to reveal Marcus and Delilah Jenkins, the real grandparents of my grandchildren. They were older than me, their faces lined by grief but softened by kindness. "Mrs. Hayes," Delilah's voice cracked. We thought we'd never see them again." Before I could answer, tears spilled down my cheeks. "I love them too," I whispered. "Ethan and Zoe, they're my whole world." Marcus stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Then maybe we can share that world. They deserve more love, not less." We sat together for hours, trading stories, mine of birthday cakes and lullabies, theirs of a daughter lost too soon, of Sunday visits to a cemetery where they had believed their grandchildren lay buried. When I showed them a photograph of the twins from last Christmas, Delilah touched the image with trembling fingers. "They're so tall now," she said, weeping. "Our babies." In that moment, grief and love braided together. We weren't rivals. We were family stitched by loss, united by the determination to save 2 innocent children from the monster who had stolen years from all of us. Momentum built. The FBI executed search warrants on my old home. Tiffany's hidden medications were seized, her falsified documents uncovered, Her digital messages extracted. Neighbors who had testified against me were interviewed again, now facing perjury charges. Some began to confess, admitting Tiffany's bribes. Brandon was stunned when agents showed up at his door. He hadn't known the full extent of his wife's betrayal. He hadn't known she planned to kill him, too. His face, I heard later, crumbled when the agents played recordings of her laughing about his weak heart. Meanwhile, Stone prepared me for my return to court. "You're not walking in as a defendant this time," he told me. "You're walking in as the plaintiff, as the truth bearer." I looked in the mirror before that hearing. Dressed in Ellie's favorite black suit, my reflection no longer looked like the ghost who had shuffled out of the courthouse weeks earlier. My shoulders were straight, my eyes alive with fire. This time, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready." That evening, I returned to the cabin one last time before moving back into the city. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in strokes of orange and gold. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the stove that had guarded Ellie's secrets for 2 years. "Thank you," I whispered, to him, to fate, to whatever thread had pulled me here. "You saved me, Eli. Now I'll save the rest of us." I closed the safe, spun the dial, and shouldered the satchel. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares, because I knew justice was coming. And this time, I would be the one holding the hammer. The morning of the raid was strangely quiet. The air was crisp, and the city seemed unaware that justice was about to descend like a hammer. I sat in the back of a black sedan with Reggie Stone beside me, his briefcase resting on his lap like a shield. Across from us were Marcus and Delilah Jenkins, their hands clasped tightly together, faces pale but resolute. When the FBI convoy rolled into Brandon's gated neighborhood, I felt my heartbeat in my ears. Agents in dark jackets poured out of unmarked cars, their radios crackling. At the head of the line was Special Agent Garcia, the same man who had listened to Tiffany's recordings with a clenched jaw. "This is it," Stone whispered. The agents moved swiftly, swarming the mansion's polished front steps. One pounded on the door. "FBI, open up." Moments later, Tiffany appeared in a silk robe, hair unkempt, eyes flashing irritation rather than fear. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. The agent held up a warrant. "Federal search and arrest." "Step aside, ma'am. This is outrageous." Tiffany spat, her voice rising an octave. "You've got the wrong woman. It's my crazy mother-in-law. You should be dragging her away, not me." But when the agents stepped inside, they already knew exactly what they were looking for. Hidden drawers, falsified documents, bottles of unprescribed medication. They found it all within minutes. Each discovery tightened the noose. Tiffany's bravado cracked. She lunged toward Brandon, who had stumbled out of the bedroom in pajama bottoms. Confusion etched across his face. "Tell them, Brandon. Tell them they can't do this to me." But Brandon's eyes were on the evidence the agents laid out across the dining table. Pill bottles with my name written in her careful script. Forged medical evaluations. Copies of checks written to corrupt doctors. And finally, a diary, her diary, detailing every step of her so-called perfect inheritance project. The fight drained from his face. "Ma'am," Agent Garcia said firmly, pulling handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for fraud, perjury, attempted murder, and conspiracy." Tiffany's scream was feral. "You fools. I made this family. Without me, Brandon is nothing." "You can't." The cuffs clicked shut. She twisted, cursing, her eyes locking on me as the agents dragged her toward the door. "You," she hissed, spittle flying. "You old witch. You did this to me." I stood tall in the driveway, Marcus and Delilah on either side of me. For once, I didn't need to answer. Her words were nothing but the howl of a trapped animal. Inside the house, the twins stood frozen at the top of the staircase, their small faces pale with confusion. Ethan gripped the railing. Zoe clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest. "Grandma?" Zoe whispered when she saw me. My knees nearly buckled. "Yes, baby," I said, my voice breaking as I held out my arms. Grandma's here. They came running, their footsteps pounding down the stairs, and collided into me with such force I almost toppled. I buried my face in their hair, breathing them in like oxygen. We missed you, Ethan sobbed. She said you were sick, that you might die. I'm not going anywhere, I promised, hugging them tighter. Not ever again. Behind me, Marcus and Delilah stepped forward timidly. Zoe turned, her eyes wide, studying their faces. Do you know us? Delilah asked, her voice trembling. Zoe's brow furrowed, then softened. Grandma? From Mommy's pictures? Delilah broke down, nodding rapidly. Yes, sweetheart, your real mommy was our daughter. Ethan looked at Marcus, tilting his head. Grandpa Marcus? Marcus's face crumpled. He fell to his knees, opening his arms. Yes, Ethan, it's me. I've loved you since the day you were born. The children clung to them. Confusion mingled with recognition, and I felt tears spill down my cheeks. The family Tiffany had tried so hard to fracture was knitting itself together before my eyes. And then, Brandon. He stood in the living room, surrounded by evidence that had once been his wife's secrets. His shoulders sagged, his eyes red, his lips trembling as he watched his children in the arms of the people Tiffany had sworn were dangerous. Mom, his voice cracked like glass. What have I done? I turned to him, my chest heavy with both fury and love. He stumbled toward me, his face crumbling, and dropped to his knees. I believed her. I believed every word. I took the house. I took the kids from you. I destroyed you. God, I'm so sorry. I don't deserve forgiveness. For a long moment, the room was silent, but for Tiffany's distant screams as the agents shoved her into a waiting car. Brandon looked up at me, his eyes raw, waiting for the sentence he thought he deserved. I reached out, placing my hand gently on his cheek. Brandon, I said softly, you were her victim too. His breath hitched. She poisoned you with lies as surely as she poisoned me with pills. She twisted you against your own mother. But you are not lost. Not if you choose to see clearly now. Tears streamed down his face as he nodded, clinging to my hand like a drowning man to driftwood. I straightened my shoulders, feeling Ellie's strength inside me. We will heal, Brandon, I said, my voice steady. But healing starts with truth, and now, the truth is finally ours. Outside, neighbors gathered behind their gates, watching Tiffany's arrest like a neighborhood spectacle. Some of the very same who had testified against me looked on in shock as she was shoved into the back of a federal car, her shrieks echoing down the street. For the first time, I didn't care what they thought. Their whispers couldn't touch me anymore, because my grandchildren were safe in my arms. Because Brandon, broken but repentant, finally saw the truth. Because Tiffany's empire of lies had crumbled in broad daylight. And because Eli, even in death, had kept his promise. You are not alone, Ellie. Not ever. As the agents drove Tiffany away, I whispered into the warm heads of my grandchildren. It's over, babies. It's finally over. But deep down, I knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of justice. The courtroom was the same one where my world had collapsed weeks earlier. But this time, I walked through its doors with my head held high. I was no longer the frail woman accused of losing her mind. I was armed with truth, with evidence, with Ellie's foresight guiding every step. The press filled the benches, their cameras flashing as I entered. They had once recorded my humiliation. Now, they would witness my vindication. Judge Reynolds, the same man who had ruled me incompetent, presided again, but his expression was different, tighter, almost ashamed, as Reggie Stone laid the evidence on the table. The recordings of Tiffany slipping pills into my coffee, the falsified medical reports, the signed affidavit from Dr. Thorne admitting to perjury, and Ellie's meticulous documents proving Tiffany's entire scheme. When the recordings played in open court, the air grew heavy. Tiffany's cold voice echoed. Once Brandon has power of attorney, we start phase 2. Stress is so bad for the heart, isn't it? It will look inevitable. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the judge's gavel could not silence the horror on people's faces. Then came the diary, the perfect inheritance project, page after page of her cruel planning, her mocking laughter at how easily she could fool doctors, neighbors, even a judge. By the time Stone finished, there was no doubt left. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, voice solemn. This court has reviewed overwhelming evidence that Mrs. Eleanor Hayes was the victim of a calculated fraud. The prior ruling of incompetence is hereby overturned. Custody of her estate, assets, and all legal authority are fully restored to her. The gavel struck, but this time the sound was music. The courtroom erupted in applause. My eyes filled with tears as Brandon, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." For once, I could breathe. Tiffany's trial came next. The state wasted no time. Every crime, every manipulation, every betrayal was laid bare under the harsh light of justice. The FBI produced her purchases of unprescribed heart medications, her falsified adoption papers for the twins, even evidence connecting her to the mysterious deaths of her two previous husbands. The jury sat horrified as recording after recording played. Tiffany casually plotting my death, discussing Brandon's inevitable heart attack, mocking my supposed dementia. Her defense lawyer tried to argue stress, delusion, misunderstanding, but the evidence was a tidal wave, and no one could stand against it. When the guilty verdict was read, fraud, perjury, attempted murder, conspiracy, and kidnapping, Tiffany finally broke. She screamed at the judge, at the jury, at me. "You'll all regret this. You think you've won?" "I'll never." The guards dragged her out before she could finish. Judge Reynolds' voice was steady. "Tiffany Sanders, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel fell. The room exhaled. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not triumph, not gloating, but a deep, cleansing relief. Revenge wasn't about Tiffany rotting behind bars. It was about the life she had tried and failed to steal from me. Weeks later, I hosted a family dinner in the mansion Tiffany had nearly claimed. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Just as Eli had always loved, Brandon was there, quieter now but more attentive than I had seen in years. Ethan and Zoe laughed freely, running between the kitchen and the garden. Marcus and Delilah sat beside me at the table, their eyes shining as they watched their grandchildren, finally safe. Before we ate, I stood and lifted a glass of wine. The chandelier's light caught the rim, scattering tiny sparks across the room. "To Eli," I said, my voice steady though my throat was tight. "The man who protected us even after his death. The man who left me not just wealth, but wisdom. To his strength, his love, and his faith in family." We raised our glasses together. For a moment, I swore I felt Eli in the room, smiling in that quiet way of his, proud that his family had survived the storm. In the months that followed, I established the Elijah Hayes Foundation, dedicated to helping elderly victims of fraud and abuse, those like me who had been silenced, humiliated, or robbed by the very people meant to love them. Every donation, every case we funded, felt like a victory not just for me, but for Eli, for all of us. One evening, as the grandchildren played in the garden and laughter floated through the windows, I sat by Ellie's old armchair with his photograph in my lap. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "She didn't win. You gave me the strength to fight, and I carried it through." The cicadas sang outside, the summer air warm and alive. For the first time in a long time, peace filled the house, and though Tiffany's shadow might linger in prison walls, in this home she had no power anymore. We were free, we were whole, we were together, and I knew Eli was right all along. True love never dies. It endures, it protects, and, in the end, it always triumphs. When I look back on those months, it feels like I lived an entire lifetime in the span of a single season. I went from a grandmother sitting in a courtroom, stripped of dignity, to a woman who uncovered truths darker than I could have ever imagined. I lost my home, my grandchildren, even the respect of the community I had lived in for decades. For a time, I thought I had lost myself, but grief has a way of teaching you where your real strength lies. And betrayal, it cuts so deep that the only way to survive is to grow stronger than the knife that wounded you. I had been humiliated in front of strangers, declared unfit to manage my own life. I was made to feel small, disposable, irrelevant. But here's what I learned. Never underestimate the silence of a humiliated woman, because silence is not surrender. Silence is the gathering of strength, and when she rises stronger than anyone imagined. That was me. That was my story. I rose because my husband, even in death, believed in me enough to leave me the tools to fight. I rose because my grandchildren deserved to know love instead of lies. I rose because truth matters, even when it comes too late to save the people we once trusted most. Yes, betrayal nearly destroyed me, but resilience rebuilt me. And I want you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, to remember this. Family is not just blood. Family is loyalty, protection, and love that endures through storms. Sometimes, those you trust most can become strangers. And sometimes, strangers, like Marcus and Delilah, become family. What matters is not who shares your name, but who shares your heart. If you're sitting there tonight, feeling powerless because someone has lied about you, stolen from you, or tried to silence you, know this. Your story is not finished. The truth has a way of finding light, no matter how long it takes. As I close this chapter of my life, I do so with gratitude. Gratitude to Eli, whose love outlasted death. Gratitude to Brandon, who faced his shame and chose to rebuild instead of staying broken. Gratitude to Ethan and Zoe, whose laughter reminds me every day that innocence can survive even the darkest storms. And gratitude to Marcus and Delilah, who showed me that family can expand to hold more love than we ever believed possible. Tiffany thought she could erase me. She thought she could erase all of us, but in trying to destroy us, she only strengthened the bonds she underestimated. Today, my life is not just restored, it is transformed. The mansion she tried to steal is now a home filled with joy again. The fortune Eli hid is not just money. It is a legacy that fuels the Elijah Hayes Foundation, protecting others from suffering what I endured. And every night, when I tuck my grandchildren into bed, I know we are safe, we are loved, and we are free. And now, dear listener, I want to leave you with this thought. Resilience is not about never breaking. It is about breaking, then building yourself back stronger than before. Never doubt your ability to rise again. Never doubt the power of truth. And above all, never underestimate a woman who has been humiliated. Because in that silence, a storm is gathering. And when she finally speaks, she changes everything. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know in the comments below. If this story touched you, let me hear your thoughts. Share your experiences. Have you ever faced betrayal from those closest to you? How did you rise again? And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of resilience, betrayal, and justice, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and join me again for the next life story. Your support means the world to me, and it's what allows me to keep bringing you these powerful stories. From my heart to yours, thank you for listening, for sharing your time, and for keeping the spirit of resilience alive.